Welcome back, one and all. Welcome to part 2 of Squarebill Crankbaits. Let's get into it.
Right on, here we go. Handy dandy map, as usual. When we did the close-up on the baits, we discussed that this particular bait was designed and made to be able to fish shallow water. We discussed a little bit earlier the versatility of the Squarebill crankbait, but we'll reiterate it again now. So let us say that the Squarebill crankbait, as we discussed, was made to be fished from 0 to around about 8 feet. We're going to call that light blue line there, we'll call that 10 foot. So anything between there and there is fair game. Now, how effectively you fish a Squarebill crankbait will be entirely up to the user. And what I mean by that is how good your casting is, how imaginative you are with your retrieves. We'll talk about retrieves a little bit later. The type of cover you are prepared to throw a Squarebill crankbait around, cover and structure that you are prepared to throw a Squarebill crankbait around, and the selection of sizes and colors you are prepared to carry in your boat. As an aside, and bear in mind, guys, we're talking about over 30 years of collecting here. I have 2 boxes of Squarebill crankbaits of different brands, different makes, ones I make myself or paint myself, in the boat when I go fishing most of the time, just so that I can have the right one for the right situation. That is my thinking. It's because I am probably slightly OCD. If I don't have the right bait for the right situation, then I'll get flustered and then I won't know what to throw. And that's a failing on my part, because there's always another bait that you can try or throw. Right, so now that we've got my failings out of the way, we discussed when we did the close-ups of the baits, patterns that you can have and try, whether they be reaction patterns or bait fish type patterns. Cool. So, the type of cover and structure where you would throw a Squarebill crankbait around. The only type of cover and structure where they are a little bit more difficult to fish is thick grass. Because Squarebill crankbaits have treble hooks, when you get into that type of cover or structure, cover in this particular case, and the way that they move through the water, they will stick in thick grass. That does not mean do not fish them around thick grass. It means be clever how you fish them around thick grass. So if we talk about the things that will mess up a Squarebill crankbait, we are talking about stuff like thick weed, thick pad, thick tulies or reeds, that type of thing. You can still fish that bait effectively around those type of covers if you are clever and accurate with your casting. For example, if you are fishing around thick grass, look for the passages or the cuts between the patches of grass. That'd be a great place to throw a Squarebill crankbait. If there's the odd strand of grass in between and you get hung up, that's great. If you get hung up, you're fishing in the right place. If you have to remove the odd strand of grass from your bait, you're fishing in the right place. You're fishing around heavy tulies or reeds and there's not any lanes or passages going through the tulies or reeds. Fish down the front of them. Don't throw it into the tulies. Fish down the front of them. The front of the tulies creates a break or a wall where fish might patrol up and down if the water's deep enough. Pads are a little bit more tricky because the stems don't generally grow straight up. They grow in bowed like that. So you may think that you've made the perfect cast between some pads and you'll still pick up the stem of the pads. The same thing applies again. Look for the wider gaps between the pads. bring the Squarebill crankbait through there. You may have to downsize. You may have to wind slightly slower so it doesn't dive quite as deep. You may have to wind and sweep. It's all about the experimentation, and that is the fun part of this bait. Let's go to the map. And like the last few that we've done, for whatever reason, seem to be very vague. Anything between there and there, guys. Can you throw a Squarebill crankbait around a dock? Absolutely you can. Absolutely you can. And if you're very skilled, unlike me, you could probably, if the dock is high enough above the water, throw it under the dock and try and bump the legs of the dock as you're coming out. You could throw it across the front of the dock. You could throw it down the sides of the dock and try and get it as parallel to the side of the dock as you can, so that you can call fish out from underneath that dock. Bluff banks that have got boulders on them, are fantastic areas to throw a Squarebill, particularly if you're using a crawdad type color. If you know the color of crawdads in your chosen body of water, buy Squarebill crankbaits in those colors and go and fish these rockier areas or more bluffy type areas where you can bash the bait into the rocks just like a little crawdad would on the bottom. Floating docks, swim platforms off the bank, boat ramps, stump fields, standing timber. It is endless, guys. If you've got submerged creek channels in less than, say, 8 feet of water, go and hit them with a Squarebill crankbait. There's usually a mound of some sort on a creek channel or on roads. On creek channels, there'll be laydowns and stuff under the water that you can't see. That's what you want to hit with your Squarebill crankbait. Use your sonar to find stuff in shallow water. Big, long flats that may have stumps on them or rocks on them. You can cover water very quickly with a Squarebill crankbait. It's a great search bait. So as you can see about how excited I'm getting about talking about this, I wish I could just go and throw one right now, to be honest. You can pretty much fish them anywhere except the areas where I've explained to you guys where it becomes a little bit more tricky. That's going to finish up the close-up portion of today's episode. Let's go back to the main camera. So let's talk about time of year and weather. This is one of a very few baits that actually shines just about throughout the whole year, but it does if you get it in the right color configurations and around the right type of structure. In this particular case, we're talking hard bottom, shale, gravel, rocks, boulders, that type of stuff. It could be one of the first moving baits that you throw in the year. In other words, a bait that has to be wound all the time. If you have Squarebill crankbaits in crawfish colors or crawdad colors, and if you go way back to the beginning of this channel, you will find the video on how to determine what color the crawdads are in your particular body of water. As soon as there is a hint of sunshine after the winter, so right at the beginning of the spring, you can start throwing us a crawdad colored Squarebill crankbait. They are absolutely lethal in lakes that have hard bottom rocks, that type of thing where crawdads are present pre-spawn, early spring. And then going through the rest of the year, as we discussed in the close-ups, in my opinion, you want to have your reaction type colors and then your bait fish type colors, and then fish them accordingly in your chosen body of water. The reaction type colors, although they can be fished in cleaner water, are ideal for stained to dirty water. Also, in those particular situations, in my experience, baits that rattle have been better for me. When you have lakes that have clear to stained water, Quieter baits or baits with no rattle can be super effective. I'm not saying don't use the rattling baits in those water, that type of water or that clarity of water. I'm saying the ones that are quieter or with no rattle might be an advantage to you. Anytime that you have the opportunity during the year to fish shallow water, 0 to say 8 foot, around there somewhere, you could be throwing a squarebill crankbait. Try it. Any type of structure other than the types of structure and cover that we discussed in the close-ups, that being thick grass, thick pads, thick tules or reeds, you can throw a squarebill crankbait. There is nothing stopping you from doing it. The way the bait is designed, as we discussed in the close-ups, that bait is designed to bash into things and deflect. So whether you're throwing it around hard bottom, timber, boulders, whatever the case, that is how it is designed to be fished. So don't be scared to throw it around those type of structure and cover. I do recommend that you keep some type of a lure retriever in the boat, whether it be one that's on a line or one that's on a telescopic pole, because when you make the decision to learn how to throw a squarebill crankbait, if you're throwing it in the right places, guys, hear me what I'm saying. If you are throwing that bait in the right places, you are going to get stuck. So make peace with that from the outset. If you're not getting stuck, you're probably not throwing it in the right places. You are going to fetch fish with an erratically running bait out of places where you wouldn't ordinarily, or other fishermen even, wouldn't ordinarily throw a moving bait. That is part of life when you're throwing squarebill crankbaits. You should be throwing them in those nasty areas. So that's time of year is pretty much all year. Depending on where you live, if you don't have ice, you could throw them in the winter quite comfortably. If you have got the forbearance for that and you want to try it, I'm pretty sure if you stick it out, you will catch fish on a squarebill crankbait. If you do live in somewhere where you get ice in the winter, the minute that ice is off, start throwing that guy. They work, particularly in the crawdad colors like we described. So for this particular bait, talking about the difference between the spawn and the pre-spawn and the summer and all that, I don't really think that applies. I think that you should probably always have one tied on. And I don't think that weather conditions really apply either. You should always have one tied on. This bait, although it can be a little bit tricky to learn how to fish, once you've worked it out, it probably should be one of the, and I say this loosely because tackle addict, but one of the baits that you have a dedicated rod for. So that rod that you are throwing your walking topwater bait on, that 7 foot medium to medium heavy moderate, maybe buy a second one and keep it specifically for your squarebill crankbaits. I promise you, once you've caught fish on this bait, you will not want to put it down. It becomes a problem. And you may be forced to buy more of them and hide them from your fishing partner and also maybe your husband or your wife. And hide them particularly from your children, because this is a good bait for children to fish with. It is very, very effective bait. When I was probably around about 10 or 11 years old, my dad, if you look at the close-up videos, you'll see I describe a bait there that's a nod to the Japanese bait makers. That color, my dad bought me I think it was a no-name brand, just El Cheapo squarebill crankbait in that color. I cannot tell you how many times I went in the water to fetch that bait. I caught, and how many times I changed the hooks, and it didn't matter when the paint got chewed off it 5 years down the line, it still caught fish. And in fact, if I had to go rooting through my old tackle boxes, I'm pretty sure I would find that guy, because I think I still have it. And I'm pretty sure that it was an cotton cordell. I think it was a cotton cordell. It wasn't a super expensive one. So that moves us on to the next part of this. So what do we look for when we're buying Squarebill crankbaits? And in the last few videos, this seems to have been a theme, guys. It comes down to personal choice. I'll put some brands at the end of the video for you to go and have a look at, or you could look at online, make some decisions for yourselves. There's a lot of good brands of Squarebill crankbaits on the market. There's countless brands of Squarebill crankbaits, different materials. Some are made of ABS plastic. That's the ones that I recommend you guys learn to fish with. There's some that are made from balsa that swim differently. Maybe try those once you're a little bit more experienced. They're usually slightly more expensive than the plastic ones. That's why I say don't learn with those. It's just generally an all-around exciting bait to fish. Okay, enough of my excitement and sidetracking. What about the retrieve? The retrieve with a Squarebill crankbait is what gives this chunk of plastic life. It is also determined largely by how you want to fish the bait. If you want it pounding into the bottom, say in a crawdad color, or if you want it deflecting off the cover and structure, rocks, limbs, whatever the blow down trees, whatever the case might be. The thing that we need to understand about crankbaits, and this being our first crankbait that we've actually tackled together, with crankbaits of varying bill or lip lengths, the harder you wind them, the deeper they will dive to the specification of that particular crankbait. The majority of Squarebill crankbaits that you can purchase today, it will be on the box of the crankbait. It will tell you what depth they will dive to. And 90% of the time, they will not run deeper than that. Yes, the haters, you can make them run deeper if you use lighter line. Yes, all of those things. Yes, yes, yes. We are learning to fish the Squarebill crankbait. So, if in your mind you think that there's an area in your lake, just as an example, that's got some stumps in it, there's some beautiful laid downs, couple of rocks, whatever the case is, and the water is between 0, the bank, and 5 feet deep. When you go and purchase your Squarebill crankbait, do your research online or even in the shop. Some of them have it on the box. This crankbait will run from 0 to that depth. Particularly when you are buying the smaller ones, generally speaking, small square-billed crankbaits will generally not run deeper than 3.5 to 4 feet. So keep that in mind when you're purchasing your Squarebill crankbait for that secret place that you've got on your lake that you want to go and try them. The retrieves. It is literally a chunk and wind bait. You can speed it up, you can slow it down, all of those things. But because it is regulated by the length of the lip, it is a chunk and wind bait. When you are winding it in and you hit something, pause. Let it float back out, start winding. It will hit it again, pause. Just like a little fish would do if it was feeding. If you are fishing a crawdad pattern one along a sloping bank or on a flat bank, which you know the depth does not vary, wind it until it hits the bottom and don't stop winding. Keep winding. You want it pounding into the bottom like a crawdad, deflecting off little stones and gravel and rocks, like a puffing up little bits of mud. That's what they're going to key in on. So it's not a difficult retrieve. The difficult part is when it gets stuck and you have to go and retrieve it. But if you have a good telescopic lure retriever or a good lure retriever that's on a line, it's not a problem. But like I said earlier, be prepared to get stuck. You're going to get stuck. And for Squarebill crankbaits, in my opinion, the telescopic retriever is easy. You can keep it next to your rods on the deck of the boat. It's a little bit trickier for the guys that are fishing from the bank. But as long as you're casting parallel to the bank and not out into the depths, you could also probably, if you had to, get in the water and get away with a telescopic lure retriever. It's super important that you remember that, guys. Like I said, if you're not getting stuck, you're not throwing it in the right places. The bite on most crankbaits is the same. They just want to take the rod away from you. You'll be winding it and they want to take it off you. They want to take the rod away from you. You do get occasions sometimes during cold fronts where crankbaits are not the best bait to be throwing, but you still want to throw them, where the bite may be a little bit more subtle, just more of a tick on the bait like that, and you may have to just lean into it a little bit more. With most crankbaits, you do not want to set the hook like you would do, say, with a jig or a soft plastic bait. Wind, you'll feel the bait, the fish hit, boom, just lean into it and carry on winding. It is another part of the reason that you want a moderate rod. So it absorbs the hook set and it absorbs that fish tearing off and going. There's usually, with squarebills particularly, because it's a shallower running bait, there's usually not much of a mistake when you get hit by a fish on a squarebill. It can be a little bit trickier in the earlier part of the year when the water's cold. They may not be quite as aggressive, and it may just feel like the line has gone heavy. Again, lean into it and start winding. I think that we've kind of got it all. I don't think we've missed anything. No, I think we've got it all. This is a good gateway lure for learning crankbaits. When we start getting into the other different deeper running types of crankbaits, or maybe more specific types of crankbaits that have been created for specific things, it can get a little bit more tricky where you have to pay more attention. But with the squarebill, it's a good bait for everybody to learn. At any level of fishing, it is a great bait for everybody. I get very excited, guys, when I talk about squarebill crankbaits. It's one of my favorite, I always say this, it's one of my favorite types of baits, but it genuinely is. I love fishing squarebill crankbaits. I hope that you guys get as excited as I do about fishing squarebill crankbaits when you go out and learn to fish them. And I hope you guys are all getting out there and doing some fishing. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next time, guys.